Paulin is a watch brand from, of all places, Glasgow, Scotland. It's not the first place in the world I'd associate with watches, and I basically only know Glasgow because of Brian Laudrup, and he used to play for a team there. But there are two brands that have my attention from that neck of the woods. The companies are Anodane and their sister brand, Paulin. And specifically for Paulin, they recently released the Mara, which is Glaswegian for Of the Sea. And fittingly, it's their first dive watch. Let's dive in. The new Mara divers come in two versions, a black dial black bezel version and a blue dial blue bezel model. Both cost $1,650. The cushion case is the same as the one from the Paulin's module line, but with a little bit rounder, chunkier profile. It's a big watch for Paulin, but not a big watch overall. It's 39.7 millimeters in diameter. The thickness is 13.5 millimeters, which is on par with a Seamaster 300M date version. The lug to lug is 48 millimeters. The case is vertically brushed on the top surfaces. The bezel is somewhere in the space between sharp and soft, and it has a thin rounded bevel that has a slight amount of polish to it. The sides are also brushed. The crown guards are almost imperceptible, and you'd be forgiven if you felt there wasn't much of a guard function to them. The bezel is unidirectional with 120 clicks. The bezel itself is a sapphire ring with either a gray or a blue color. The bezel itself has a slightly curved shape, which has a bit in common with a Blancpain 50 Fathoms bezel, or in the less pricey range, the older Seiko 50 Fathoms models like the SNZH57. Just, it's more pronounced on this model. The water resistance is 300 meters. The dial has a grained texture to it. There's nothing overpowering, but it's a lot more interesting than a flat dial. The hour markers are looped plots. They are alternately shaped like circles, squares, or triangles. The seconds hands is a teeny tiny little bit of a lollipop. The hour hand is a short, stubby, rounded affair with a stick hand for the minutes hand. At 4:30 on the outer track, they've printed Glasgow in Paulin's own typeface, and at 7:30 they've printed Paulin. There's no Swiss made anywhere to be seen on this dial, and it isn't a Swiss made watch. Inside and under the solid case beats a Le Joubert G101. At this price point, the movements you often see are Sellita. The Paret, though, has a significantly higher power reserve with 68 hours over the Sellita SW200 and 210s, which usually max out at around 42 hours. There are two grades of this movement, and the model in this version gets you an accuracy of ±7 seconds per day. It's not COSC, but it's far more than you'll get in the stated specs from most Seikos at this price point. The watches come with fabric straps that are lined on the underside. They are black or blue, depending on the model. They match the case and the dial. We're talking about dive watches, and if you are new to watches and just diving in, I know, bad pun, but just forgive me. The fact is, if you are trying to learn a little bit of watches, want to hear a lot about watches, then my channel might actually be for you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider it. Subscriptions make more sense to me in terms of knowing what I'm doing well than views. It's a way of telling me this is content that works for you. So give me the feedback, leave a subscription if you feel it's warranted, and also leave a like, leave a comment if you want. Thanks a ton. This is a weird watch. That's not a bad thing. 48 millimeters lug to lug isn't large, but it's not medium either. It's about a millimeter longer than an Omega Speedmaster. At 13.5 millimeters, it's not Panerai thick, but slim isn't a term that you'd apply either. And like I said earlier, it's about the same as the date model on a 300M Seamaster. But despite all these numbers, the watch on the wrist wears smaller than you'd think. And I think it comes down to three things that affect how I experience it. The lugs, just like the short, stubby Omega curved lugs, are curved, not in the same way, and they are strongly rounded at the horns. The almost bubble back-like bezel in combination with the cushion case combines to also make it feel a lot smaller than it is in terms of, pure measurements. And lastly, the design is just much more playful than most divers out there. All of this makes for a watch that just sits really well on my wrist. For people who are 6.5 inches or thereabouts or have terrific wrists, they're going to like this watch in most cases. It's not often that I do a little wristwatch check, but I'm going to surprise you every now and again. This one is probably going to get people riled up in the comments because what am I wearing? Oh, I'm wearing an Apple Watch. Ooh, am I not a terrible human being? Am I being a bad boy? Who knows? Fact is, I was just down at the gym and I don't wear my regular watches at the gym. I don't want them scratched. And this is a good watch for telling time, controlling my podcasts, and essentially just also measuring how long I've been down there. And then maybe I'm going to be super, super buff, and then I'll start eating protein and creatine and all sorts of stuff. And then I'm going to be a big, giant boy. rambling, sorry, back to the video. But, and this is the elephant in the room, this is not your average diver. Doxa 300, Omega Seamaster, Unimatic, Bremont Supermarine, almost all dive watches are made to look like serious tool watches or formal desk divers, or some mix of those two aesthetics. If a case is soft and rounded, then it's big at the same time to balance things out. If it's small, then the finishing is going to be more precise, and the bezels and dials lean towards aesthetics that emphasize utility and legibility. Even the color palettes lean towards deeper blues, contrasty oranges, solid blacks. A textured black, and definitely a textured boys' room blue, is just incredibly rare to see in typical dive watches. This is a watch that embodies the same playfulness that you'll find in the classic Nomos club models. Not the sports ones, but the original clubs. It's something akin to what Swatch also might offer, just with far more serious specs. So I don't think I'm offending anybody at Paulin by saying this is not going to appeal to the masses. I don't think so, because Paulin also doesn't aim for the masses. Now, I've been working on a way of conceptualizing how brands position themselves. And there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. But for me, the model that is most useful in the context of this Paulin diver is the following. Think of the market in terms of a circular heat map. There's a center. The center is where you have the mainstream customer. It's the statistically average, normal, generic customer. It's the customer that chooses the safe choice, the good choice. It's the customer that potentially doesn't want to think too much about their purchase and just want a good something, car, watch, telephone for the price. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the center for mid-tier executive business cars, you have the Mercedes C-Class, the BMW 3 Series, or an Audi A4. These are, for the mid-range buyer, the statistically normal choice. The car doesn't say super much about you other than you can afford a Mercedes C-Class or a BMW 3 Series. It's a good business car for the price. And what about a suit? Well, in Europe, it's a Hugo Boss. That's a suit. That's a good suit for the price. It's not a Gucci, it's not a Salvatore Ferragamo, it's not a Savile Row bespoke suit. It's just a relatively decent suit, and likely one that will be bought by someone that does not care about the difference between twill or some other yarn technique. And in semi-luxury sports watches, the statistically normal choice is an Aquaterra or a Datejust. For luxury dive watches, it's the Submariner, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, the thing to know about this center is that the watches in that center generally tend to end up following the same design rules. A Longines Conquest is different from a Tudor Black Bay 1, but at their core, they all appeal to the same buyer with the same design choices. They have a premium bracelet, they have sunray dials, they have a shiny case, they have an accurate movement. The next thing you need to know about this little heat map is, as you move outside of that center, the customer gets more and more distinctive, and the watches need to be more and more distinctive as well. So a Doxa 300T is not a watch that appeals to that center customer. It appeals to some sort of buyer that is looking for something distinctively different. And the same goes for a Longines Ultrachron. That customer is going to be measurably different from the average customer. So the watch also needs to be meaningfully different. And this is where we take a new brand, a brand that isn't mainstream. So not Longines, not Tudor, not Rolex. We take Bremont. You want to sell a dive watch. And what do? Well, you've got some questions that need answering. And the questions are, do you want lots of customers? And do you want to aim for the mainstream customer? In the case of Bremont, they do. So they make the Bremont Supermarine. And the watch to me is just another middle of the road, average, broadly appealing dive watch appealing to the statistically average middle of the road buyer. And why does that watch get bashed? Because it's average and middle of the road. Very little really sets it apart as an offering from a Tudor Black Bay that's a watch that it's competing 100% directly with. And it kind of illustrates a problem, because in that middle, you have watches like the Aquaterra, the Datejust, the Submariner, the Seamaster. The problem is, when you're a new brand and you're trying to make a watch that stands out in a segment where fitting in is by far the most important thing to live up to, why would a customer choose an unknown brand like Bremont when they can buy something they know from a brand they've heard of like Tudor or Rolex? So that's where you have to look for another option. And this is where you look at somebody like Nomos. They've made the Nomos Club Sport. That's the club watch that they had for ages. They took that design, they kept the numerals and the straight lugs, and they slapped on a 3-link bracelet and some sunray dials. They didn't do a Bremont. They went for just ever so slightly outside of that center. The Nomos Club Sport is not trying to be statistically average because it could never ever compete on a 1-to-1 fight with a Datejust or an Aquaterra. But by taking some of those sports watch signifiers and combining it with the Nomos design language, it manages to differentiate itself and to stand out. It sacrifices a little bit for going for the mass market average buyer, but it isn't so far out that it can't leech off a couple of semi-mainstream adjacent customers. And the same goes for something like an Oris ProPilot X. These watches don't go head to head, but they just stand off to the side and subtly say to the buyer, hey you, the guy that thinks the Datejust is boring or too popular, take a look at me, I'm different. And that's what leads me back to Paulin. The Paulin Mara is not center adjacent. It's not slightly different from some random Seiko SPB model. It's markedly different. It's all the way out here somewhere. It's actively saying, dude, you don't identify with those people over there that buy those standard watches. You're quirky, you're artsy, you're creative, you're avant-garde. You're wearing purple socks with a 3-piece jet black suit. You've got horn-rimmed glasses and you walk around the city looking at interesting graffiti. I have a watch for you. But it's not a Mr. Jones design, and it's not a Konstantin Chaikin. It's not just playful for the sake of being playful. There's an artistic flair to this watch that's going to appeal to a different buyer than the Mr. Jones buyer or the Konstantin Chaikin buyer. I'd put my money on this watch being bought by people younger than me, with better style than me, and working within more creative fields than the ones I work in. For them, it's going to be a fabulous watch. As for pricing, $1,600, the movement is a cut above what you often get at this point on some dimensions. Power reserve specifically, accuracy-wise, you're not finding a lot of divers with COSC certification under $1,800. COSC typically adds around $250, $300 to the retail price. For less than $1,600 though, you will find a lot of watches with a steel bracelet, and a good one at that. Easy adjust, quick release are not standard, but it's fairly common. On top of that, the finishing of a case is always hard to quantify for divers. Unimatic dive watches, as an example, are almost all sandblasted and have very basic finishing. There's not a lot of sharp bevels, differentiated surfaces. Aesthetically, this makes for a very tool-forward watch, but it's also a manufacturing choice that keeps the price lower. For the Paulin, the case finishing is on the simpler side of things, and that does keep costs down. But aesthetically, it's kind of what you're going to be looking for in this type of watch. I think with all the color and with the type of bezel that they've gone with, a sharper case would just feel weird. The dial and bezel, not ceramic. There aren't applied faceted markers. On that level, it's a fairly simple affair. The strap is good and they haven't cut corners. The lining underneath is something they could have omitted to cut a little cost, but they didn't. And that's the key. I don't feel that they cut corners anywhere. This is a fabulously executed watch. And if they sold enough of them, could they drive the retail price down maybe? Yeah, I suppose. But it's a niche watch from a niche brand, so they're not going to sell millions of these watches. Could they have done everything from China? I'm sure. But they're in Glasgow and that's not cheap. Could they have switched out a Le Jour Paret for a Sellita SW200 and sold it for closer to 1,000 or 1,200? Maybe. For a brand that had more scale than Paulin, they probably could push the price a little bit lower. But strangely, I don't feel that the price is wrong. That's because I appreciate the difference between the cold, hard calculation of the materials, the minutes in the CNC machine, the wear and tear of the tools, and the time spent on regulation and quality control, and the economies of scale on the one hand, and the personal value of original design and a well thought out product. I would personally be perfectly happy to pay $1,600-ish for this watch. That's my point. The package is so well thought out and executed right down to the cork case that it arrives in. It's just such a satisfying little watch. And in a world where some brands really rip their customers off, this feels entirely okay to me, which brings me to my rating. And I'm still working on a little bit of a new and improved rating scale, but the new one I have is at the bottom, there are the watches that I will forever remember them as hideous. Second from the bottom, it's a watch I'll have forgotten about in a week's time. Third, it's a nice watch, about it. Fourth, I might actively recommend it to someone if they asked within the range of the kind of watches they're looking for. Fifth, this is a watch I keep coming back to. And sixth, this is a watch that lives rent-free in my head. Now, would I ever buy this watch personally? Well, probably not. It's fun, but I don't see it in my personal rotation. But I honestly do still, and that's my rating, keep coming back to it. That's in part because there are relatively few divers like it, and the execution of the product overall is pretty damn good. Paulin are good with the whole aesthetics thing. It's their strength and it shines through. So no, I wouldn't buy it myself, but for the right buyer, I think this is a smash hit in its own relatively small niche far away from the center. I could see this watch selling like hotcakes in the context of Paulin. I really like this watch. And Scotland, it's not nearly as bad as Renton would like you to think. They make some pretty nice watches, and the whiskey, also pretty good. So what's your take? Any thoughts about these models? Anybody's bought some of them? Share your experiences in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.